You are listening to Sheep Might Fly, a podcast of serialised fiction and occasional essays, written and read by Tansy Rayner Robbins. Our current original story serial is Something Frightful, a cosy romantic fantasy about a chaotic witchy family, a gloomy gothic manor house, and the executive assistant they all need in their lives. Chapter 6. Are you coming to this disastrous dinner party? On the cornice of the wardrobe, the hand of an amateur had painted this inscription: "Mistrust all enterprises that require new clothes. E. M. Forster." Libby was not used to considering cardigans as appropriate workwear, but the chilly stone-walled rooms of Frightful Manor had changed her mind rapidly. She'd spent the last decade in hotel air conditioning. She simply did not own sufficient quantities of knitwear for a genuine Lancashire castle. If this counted as a problem, it was immediately solved. After mentioning the chill one time to Winifred over breakfast one morning, jumpers and cardigans started appearing in Libby's tower. Usually they were neatly folded and left outside her door. Except for one which had, much like the throw cushions, appeared overnight at the foot of her bed, in the same alarmingly revealing shade of teal. She never wore that particular cardigan outside her room, but it was the comfiest thing ever. Many of the garments were shapeless, in black or grey wool, with an inexpertly hand-knitted sort of vibe. Libby did not wear those to the office, but she did wear them to breakfast, and noticed a covert smile or two from Winifred, which solved that non-mystery at least. She suspected the gifts of knitwear stemmed from various sources around the family, given the erratic styles, designs, colours, and even different methods of folding. Libby might not have managed to have a coherent conversation with every member of the Blight family, but these random donations of warm clothing felt more welcoming than any amount of small talk. Today's cardigan was lavender, in a smart, almost tailored style that made it feel office-appropriate, especially given that her boss regularly shuffled in, wearing yesterday's trousers and mismatched slippers. The lavender cardigan was also blessed with deep pockets, all the better for concealing post within. This is not an excuse to approach him, she told herself sternly, as she headed out on her mid-morning break. Libby had barely exchanged a sentence with Otis Blight since that first night, a week and a half ago, when he performed his apparent duty as House representative in showing her her new quarters. She got a glimpse or two of him most days, but always at a distance, walking with purpose, peering at walls, snatching a travelling breakfast from the kitchen nook, clambering into cupboards, or, on one notable occasion, hanging from a ceiling while inspecting a large spidery chandelier. Busy, in the middle of some urgent or thoughtful task, unapproachable. She did not necessarily think he was avoiding her, no reason to think he thought anything of her at all, but he was actively avoiding Horace. The beak of the Blight family was slowly building up a head of steam about this, which was bound to become Libby's problem sooner or later. Several times a day, Horace stomped back into the office, muttering about how the house had favourites, and his brother was impossible. Libby had assumed at first it was Silas who was causing all the stress, but Horace took comfort from a baseline assumption that Silas was always doing something annoying. In the case of Otis, this appeared to be a new and unpleasant development. Libby had not sought out Otis's company, preferring to keep her mild crush to a low simmer. She had already decided not to ask him about the magically appearing cushions and that one alarming cardigan, thanks to the incriminating shade of teal. When any other household concerns or questions arose, her first impulse was to ask him about them. but she squashed them down and saved them for whichever egg was being most friendly at breakfast the next day. Still, the letter felt like something Otis ought to know about, whatever Horace said. And Libby considered, as she rounded a corridor that had only that morning been rather more acutely angled, if it wasn't the right thing to do, the house would probably prevent her getting anywhere near him. She was pretty sure now that the teal hints in her bedroom decor had not been sent by any member of the family, but the house itself. Great grim family homes were known to be weird, weren't they? She wasn't imagining the hints of personality that made themselves known. Or perhaps she was simply having a nervous breakdown, in the form of paranoia about walls that watched her, an ensuite bathroom that cleaned itself for her convenience, and occasional colour-coded messages expressed through cosy gifts. If this was a nervous breakdown, it was oddly wholesome. Libby didn't hate it. Nervous breakdown or no nervous breakdown, Libby was not imagining how often Frightful Manor seemed to know her needs, and often anticipated them. If Horace's theory about favourites was accurate, then somehow she had made the list. Today she only felt like half a fool for patting the walls in a friendly manner and whispering, "Do you think you could direct me to Otis Blight?" A corridor became shorter. A door led to somewhere it previously had not. A trailing ornamental plant literally extended itself to point at a staircase, partially concealed behind an assemblage of hat stands. And for the very first time, Libby discovered the Frightful Manor dining room. She could see why the eggs avoided it. The table was long and thin, carved from a timber so dark it was practically black, and it could easily seat around 60 people. The other end of the table was on the horizon. A white lace table runner stood out starkly against the dark grain. There were no windows, only creepy wooden walls that looked as if someone had begun whittling several miles of fake bookshelf out of huge knotted trees and lost interest halfway through. Or as if a library had been cursed to return to dead tree form and, well, got stuck halfway. Libby could see the silhouettes of book spines pushing out here and there, occasionally with a tea light candle placed on a ledge or fairy light strand hanging from a sharpened twig. These small attempts to make the dining room charming and festive only added to the aura of overwhelming threat. It was dark not only because of the lack of windows. Each of the, 12 chandeliers were alight with electricity, but somehow the heaviness of the room sucked the brightness out of the bulbs. There were no heavy-framed portraits on the walls. An odd omission for such an intimidating room. It still somehow felt like the eyes of every Blight ancestor were fixed upon Libby and her lavender cardigan as she moved slowly across the polished floorboards. Several doorways surrounded the room, each large and arched but slightly different heights. Most were propped open. Several of the rooms that Libby glimpsed through those doorways did not belong on this floor of the house. All the better for a quick getaway after the soup course, my dear. Otis Blight sat on the polished floor, with his arm buried entirely inside the dark wooden walls of wall. He jerked his head in surprise as Libby cleared her throat, eyebrows raised, shoulders tensed, as if bracing himself for bad news. Clearly Otis was unaware that Horace Blight's surprising and new talent for delegation was still limited to phone calls, shopping lists, and calendar events. It had not yet occurred to Horace that an executive assistant could reasonably be asked to pass work-related messages to members of his family who were avoiding him. Libby was not going to be the first to suggest it. Before Libby could say anything, Otis blurted, "Are you coming to this disastrous dinner party?" "I knew there was a dinner tonight, not that it would be disastrous," said Libby. She eyed the enormous table and the dozens upon dozens of ancient chairs. Just how many blights were cackling in the attic? "Successful outcomes require the management of expectations," said Otis in a hollow sort of way, as if he was no longer talking about either Libby or dinner. That odd anonymous note was burning a hole in Libby's pocket. Still, she hesitated to inform Otis that a perfect stranger was under the impression that his doomed ambitions meant that he must be stopped. What she really wanted to ask was why his arm was stuck in the wall of the dining room. But Otis was carrying the pose off with his usual effortless grace. It seemed rude to call attention to any hostage situation that may or may not be taking place between himself and his family's dining room. Instead, Libby said, "Odd to schedule a dinner party on a Monday." Otis pulled a face, as if his arm had discovered a pocket of cold porridge within the wall. "I don't think Mum's looked at a calendar since 1975. Mabel, our one cousin who doesn't live in, has some time off, said she'd pop by. I think her strategy was to avoid the weekend so as not to make a fuss. Mum and Auntie Em both took that as a personal challenge. There are to be 12 courses and a string quartet." It was hard to tell what was more distasteful to Otis, the catering or the entertainment, but behind his sharpness was an exhaustion that Libby recognised. She'd been running on fumes since Anna Minotaur's formal will reading. Her burnout had char marks. She knew what it was like to reach the point where you woke every morning feeling like someone had drunk all your blood and left you with nothing but post-it notes and whiteboard markers in your veins. "Are you all right?" she asked Otis quietly. He looked startled, then chilly and poised, like he had uploaded a new screensaver of effortless beauty directly to his cheekbones out of sheer emotional self-defense. "Why do you ask?" Libby gave him a long, searching look. "Well," she said, "for a start, that wall appears to be digesting you." Otis returned her searching look, his teal eyes unreadable. He inhaled as if about to say something. "Otter!" Horace Blight, turrets fortified for combat, lurched through one of the arched doorways, blinking suddenly like he'd fallen from daylight directly into an underground tunnel. Libby straightened up. She had not been caught doing something illicit, nothing to see here. Horace peered at her. "Ah, Libby, have you seen him?" Surprised, she glanced in the direction of Otis, only to realise that he was no longer sitting at her feet, with his arm buried in the wall. He was entirely in the wall. The shadows of his broad hands flared briefly against the gnarled tree knots, and then vanished behind a protruding half-shelf of not books. "Well?" Horace demanded, in the shouty voice that was his default outside the office. Libby had learned not to take this personally. Horace was one of life's natural bellowers, even when remarking on the weather. "Seen who?" she asked innocently. "My dratted brother number 2, he grumbled in return. Otter, she had to ask. Quite an unfair name. If asked to compare Otis Blight to a creature of the wilderness, she would probably blurt something embarrassing like noble stag or peregrine falcon. Otters were soft and fluffy. They held each other's hands while sleeping afloat." Horace looked faintly abashed. "You know what they call me. You haven't seen the wretch?" "He's not in the room," said Libby. Best to go for honesty over accuracy. "Am I really invited to this dinner?" "You were invited, weren't you? I saw you on Mum's list." The invitation had fluttered into Libby's tower window at 6 a.m. that morning, printed on pearly pink paper with a gilded wax seal. To Miss Liberty Grey, Rose Tower, Frightful Manor, Lancashire. Libby wasn't wild about the Miss or the Liberty, but it was a pretty invitation. There was something about the official acknowledgement from Ophelia freaking Westwood, of all people, that she lived in this ridiculous house, that made her feel warm and fuzzy. That was, of course, before Libby saw the dining room of despair and started worrying about the dress code. "I thought it was a family thing," she said hesitantly. Horace waved the lazy hand of a man who had never in his life thought for more than 5 seconds about what to wear. "More of a house meeting with tureens. It's going to be vile, but I'd appreciate your presence if you're up for it. I have to announce the open day to my lot, and there will be opinions, especially from Mum's side of the table. It's best to let her have as wide an audience as possible for these things, or she'll keep staging events until she's satisfied." "Of course I'll come," said Libby, following Horace back to their office without glancing even once at the wall that had swallowed Otis Blight. Oh, Briggs Anvil, she couldn't ask the house for guidance on what to wear for dinner. It would probably offer her a fluffy robe and slippers matching a certain pair of eyes, and then she'd have to throw herself out of a tower window. Thank you for listening to Sheep Might Fly. This podcast was recorded on Palawa land. I acknowledge and pay respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional and continuing custodians of Lutruwita. Sheep Might Fly is produced and edited by Andrew Finch. You can sign up to my author newsletter for updates. Follow me on Instagram, Blue Sky, or Threads at TansyRR. And if you like this podcast, consider supporting me at Patreon, where you can receive all kinds of bonus rewards, early ebooks, and exclusive stories for a small monthly pledge. You can also listen to these very podcast episodes 2 weeks early. I have recently launched the Teacup Magic Emporium at tansyrr.com, my author store, where you can buy signed paperbacks, merch, and more direct from the author. Check it out today, and I will see you next week.